Hello, welcome to the Defense Board Podcast. I'm Stewart Webb, Analyst and Editor. Joining me is Chris Murray, Associate Editor and also Senior Analyst. So today we're going to be talking about Iran and its irregular warfare tactics during this crisis, and probably a bit of the past too, because we're going to tie that in with the future. So, as we know, Iran has been firing missiles and drones at the Gulf cooperation countries. Turns out to be 83% of the munitions are being thrown at those. And of course, they've shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Chris, do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, what it made me think about is you mentioned this in our previous podcasts about Iran, where you had made the observation that they were fighting what appeared to be in some respects, a rather irregular warfare or approach to war, and started making me think about that the two Chinese generals who wrote that book back in '99. The name escapes me off the top of my head, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where they were talking about warfare by other means against a larger actor like the U.S., for example, and
Yeah.
indirect methods. And it made me sort of you sort of said it in almost like you're just tossing off a comment sort of thing. But I thought it was really interesting and worth exploring because I do think that what we're looking at here is two very different conceptions of warfare, where the U.S. is using a rather conventional approach, and to your point, the Iranians are pursuing a more, I guess, irregular, for lack of a better term, going after economic targets, trying to attack U.S. allies in the region to sow discord and to going after the strait. And it's, I think, indicative of a larger sort of shift we're seeing in warfare. I sometimes wonder if maybe we're going through a second or the beginnings of a second military revolution. That might be premature, but it is interesting to see, and I thought it was something worth exploring, especially seeming since there is such a huge disconnect. Not, you talked about the different types of fighting that are occurring, but I think there's also a different conception of what the war is. So we could end up with both sides thinking they've won. For the Iranians, it might simply be we've endured the Iranian regime, I should say, has endured everything the great Satan has thrown at us, and we're still here, right? Whereas the
Yeah.
U.S. are like, well, we've depleted their. I mean, by all appearances, it seems that the air war that the U.S. and Israelis are engaged in has been incredibly successful. So I'm sure in their view, they're winning, right? So I thought that was really interesting to explore.
No, totally. And, going to the axis of resistance, I mean, that's what Iran created to kind of uh, hedge off any, attack. Those groups have been severely degraded except for the Houthis. And they just launched one ballistic missile on Saturday. And essentially, that was, just them saying, hey, we could be in the fight if, we've been told to. And, the Iranian regime's always been having like this, third party, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and even to some degree, even Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda itself has had some support from Iran, but it's always been kind of handing off Al Qaeda operatives to Hezbollah or for training, right? That's actually what led to the embassy bombings in 1998 in Kenya and Tanzania. And then if we go a little bit further on, Hamza bin Laden, Osama bin Laden's son, was under house arrest. The current leader of Al Qaeda, Saif al-Adil, is purportedly under house arrest too in Tehran. And even though they've been kind of giving them some, support, we're going to get to the point where when's the Axis of Resistance 2.0 going to happen, right? And that's kind of what I'm thinking is that will Iran actually not just secretively give support to Al Qaeda, but actually be a little more nuanced and actually give them more and more support and actually be a little more outreaching and create that Axis of Resistance 2.2 through Al Qaeda. I mean, Tehran's got so many cards to play, while the United States, I'm assuming, really doesn't. It's just either bombing or, again, the Middle East bingo game of send in the Kurds.
The whack-a-mole, yeah, the
Yeah,
whack-a-mole game too. I
right.
mean, that is an interesting thought. There are, I suppose, more potential avenues of approach for the Iranians. What they're capable of actually pursuing is a different question. just because between saying and doing lies the sea, right? And the US has been playing a pretty steady and successful whack-a-mole game, right? They've been at this for a while now, degrading each of these groups, and so is so have the Israelis, pardon me. So that's certainly an option. I wonder about how viable it is. I do think that that's certainly the direction the Iranians would probably look. I think you're right to highlight that. I mean, this is what happens when you're outmatched, right? It makes sense for the Iranians to look for indirect and irregular methods of approach, right? I mean, one of the things that some people tend to forget is the Iranian drone program is like they were one of the first guys in on it, right? The Iranian drone program is been around for quite a long time. They were one of the first developers of drones. They really got in on the ground floor of it, and they have an excellent drone program, as we're seeing. They're limited by bandwidth. They don't have the ability to, put a Reaper drone over an enemy like on the other side of the planet. They don't have satellites and bandwidth, but you've seen what they're capable of doing it, and it's borne out by this sort of perception of themselves as an underdog and having to look for like understandably look for indirect methods as opposed to a direct confrontation with the US, which clearly they wouldn't be, ideal for them.
No.
So the question though is after everything they've gone through, whether or not something that's going to be available to them, because I suspect, pardon me, that at the end of the day, a lot of this is going to come down to money and reach, right? And there are competitors like for influence in the region. You look at Saudi Arabia, for example, right? They have quite a bit more money and influence. They're also Sunni versus Shia, but the Saudis are looking to try and moderate these groups, right? They're not really interested in radicalization and destabilization. So that creates a little bit of room for Iran to maybe fill in the void. Oh, what are your thoughts on that?
If we go back to the Sunni Shia divide, I mean, Hamas is Sunni, right? Iran is, Shia.
That's a fair
It's
point. Yeah.
right. And same thing with Al Qaeda. Like they've kind of dealt with their own stuff. The Houthis aren't Sunni or Shia themselves. They're kind of their own sect. So Iran's been able to have the kind of big tent approach. Same with Al Qaeda, right? Not like the Islamic State where it's our road, our road or, you know, death. So now I want to talk about what you touched upon too, is that the United States and Israel have been really good with bombings. Mushtaba Khamenei is now the supreme leader of Iran, but Mushtaba already before was kind of a recluse, right? We only have a few photos of him. He was never really in public. After the bombing, which killed his father and probably one of the wives of Al Khamenei, which could have been his mom, we don't know. Mushtaba had a fractured foot and lacerations to his face. We've only heard from third parties about his decrees. So Mushtaba himself could be dead. And to go back to the Taliban, I mean, Mullah Omar was dead for like 10 years, and the Taliban kept on saying, oh no, Mullah Omar said this, Mullah Omar said that. We were following Mullah Omar. And the same thing could be happening in Iran, and we don't know. It could be
This
just
is
the
one of the, sorry, go on.
it could just be the IRGC pulling the strings. And if, let's say, Mushtaba is dead, and a new supreme leader is, called afterwards, the IRGC is going to be the one running the show. And so after this engagement with Iran, we actually might see a more militaristic government led by the IRGC.
Yeah, so this is a point that I didn't make last time that I'm glad you sort of steered it in this direction. One of the things that makes the Iranian situation so unique and different, I think, than say Venezuela is that this isn't a dictator-based regime or a regime of one, right? Where it's a cult of personality. This is a robust state with an incredibly complex, layered government and control, right? And incredibly self-sufficient too, as anyone who's served in Afghanistan will be able to tell you, right? There's everything from washing machines to toasters to cars that are made in Iran from start to finish, right? Like they've had to be incredibly self-sufficient. And so you're dealing with a developed modern state with I hesitated with the word modern for probably understandable reasons, but cutting the head off with the Ayatollah, that's not going to be enough. And the thing that's sort of worrisome that you sort of alluded to too is it's a complex system and pardon me, beneath the Ayatollahs, you'll understand why I just tripped up on myself. There's a bunch of true believers, straight up jihadists who really do buy into the whole great Satan thing in the West. And that's a chilling thought, to be sure.
Totally. And if you take a step back too, you know, Iran was involved in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, killing US soldiers. That's a win for them. They had some
Mhm.
hands in with the Taliban. That's a win for them. The increase capability of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, a win for them. As much as we want to think that Iran has just been kind of this like underdog in the region that hasn't really been doing very much, for them, they've been going from win to win to win.
Yeah, because they have a different conception of what a win is, right? It's very, it's, one of the things I said last time is it's very early on, and it's going to be a very long time before we can fully appreciate what is actually playing out in front of us right now. There's a lot of different players in the game with what you're alluding to here with Iran and all these other groups, so that could just as easily end up, blowing up in their face. And there could be a ton of infighting. We saw it with the NDP convention the other day. True believers, that doesn't mean they're all going to get along and have the same conception of how to do things, right? It just as much as it could end up being a more militant regime, it could end up being a regime that tears itself apart. One of the things I've said about the US is that victory would be what defeats MAGA, the MAGA movement, and because it's a loose coalition of different groups of idealists, right? And you're sort of seeing that now where the cracks are starting to form. So that could be something that plays out in Iran as well, right? Where this power shift towards this other layer of true believers could be incredibly dangerous unifying motivator for a more extreme approach. Or it could be the thing that signals the beginning of the end and it starts to tear itself apart inside.
We ended with a phrase, and I think this phrase is going to be continuous through our podcast, is that it is yet to be seen.
There's a lot of layers of this, right? I don't know what's going on with this, but I caught something about Russia giving Iran intelligence on the U.S. targets.
Oh, well, let's step back on that though. So there was a Hezbollah-linked group that launched a Shahed drone at the naval base in Cyprus when it first started. The British actually found that there was a Russian guidance system that was controlling that Shahed. So it may not be built by the Russians, but the Russians are giving components to Iran, then assembled as Iranian Shaheds, and then given to their partners throughout the region.
The thing with that I find interesting, what draws me towards that is um, whether or not these two conflicts can separate it from one another, or if they end up sort of joining. It makes the U.S. president's current position on Russia all the more untenable. It was already pretty untenable in my position, in my opinion, but it makes it a lot harder. There are elements of the MAGA base who are pretty pro Putin and pro Kremlin and don't seem to see the writing on the wall there. But if, Russian intelligence is responsible for the deaths of American soldiers, it starts to become, I don't think you're going to see a second Alaska. You know what I mean? So, and especially the other side of that too, and this is something you and I wanted to talk about in a separate podcast, is the impacts of the Iranian war on the Ukraine-Russian situation. Is like we're already seeing Ukraine, Zelensky very shrewdly making inroads into the Middle East and reaching out to the Gulf states, given that they are the most qualified to confront these Iranian drones and methods of warfare. I was just reading something today that an a Ukrainian interceptor drone, they've gotten up to 217 kilometers an hour
Yeah. Right.
for
And
the
these
little.
things are a fraction of the cost. I think a
Yeah,
Shaheed
we're
is
talking about the little one, just so everyone's
yeah,
clear. I'm talking about the little guys, the little
yeah,
drones, not 217 kilometers an hour is
yeah.
incredible.
And a Shaheed it costs about 30,000 US, and these Ukrainian interceptors are less than $3,000, and they haven't fully
Yeah.
scaled up in production.
Well, and they're also using, old school methods that include like just shooting them down. Whereas, one of the things that the Ukrainians were talking about is, if they saw the Americans fire like 8 Patriot missiles to take down one of these
Yeah,
things, and they're like, you guys are out of your mind. And this is something that people don't often think about. The old adage about amateurs talking tactics and professionals talking logistics. Those things take a long time to replace, and they're pretty expensive.
which for me also makes the United States talking about seizing Kharg Island, 15 miles off the Iranian coastline, having airdrop or land these troops by the sea and have a further logistic route from, Iraq to Kharg Island while it's in the backdrop of the Iranian.
It's inside the
Yeah,
envelope, right?
exactly, right? It's only 15
Yeah.
miles. So that opens up multiple launch rocket systems and a whole plethora of things that the United States hasn't attacked yet. And also, if Iran were to just destroy the oil infrastructure there, you've got, let's say, upwards to 1,200 Marines on that island who are now breathing in oil smoke and whatever else and having to deal with it in a very enclosed island. So, good luck with that.
Well, one of the things, just random thoughts popping across my mind while we're talking about this is, we're talking about, I mentioned earlier something about whether or not we're facing a new, military revolution. And then I kind of laugh into myself because the new warfare is the same as the old. I'm thinking about, the US having these really expensive, complex systems that take a long time to build and replenish, like Patriot missiles, whereas the Ukrainians are using like, I saw a joke. I don't know if it was true or not, but it was like Vickers machine guns in a plane,
Yeah.
like shooting down. And this is a lesson that we continually forget in peacetime. We build these gold-plated, multi-billion-dollar systems, and it's like in war, that's not what you want. You want something that's cheap, quick, and easy. Ukrainians have been with one hand tied behind their back having to do this, and so you're seeing what works, and it's, stupid simple. And I think that's something the US is going to have to deal with, or alternatively, just build my Murray Canal between Abu Dhabi and Sohar across across the peninsula to bypass it.
But again, right? I mean, we're talking about these, big, systems, Patriots, and Trump's going to make his golden battleship fleet soon. But you take a step back, as much as we want to do strategic bombing over Iran and such, Iran only needs to do is take a step back, go into irregular warfare, which we've been talking about, and it upsets the whole balance, right? Because it's not state on state, it's not the fair match anymore.
And they have two different conceptions of victory, right? Like for the Iranians, they just have to survive, and they're in their house, right?
Yeah,
The U.S. aren't. So you have two different conceptions of victory, and you have two very different conceptions of warfare as well. And this is one of the things that the U.S. continually runs into is that they're so good at peer-to-peer, state-to-state conflict, and nobody in their right mind would want to face them. You look at Iraq, right? It was 6 days, uh, but then it was 20 years, which is a lesson that we that is continually repeated. Um,
well, and there was a
so,
rocket attack on Baghdad airport just yesterday too, right? Which took out one of the more strategic planes for the Iraqi Air Force. So, as much as we want to say, hey, even 20 years, it's still ongoing in some respects, right? So,
and in some regards, the U.S. still is struggling to figure out how to deal with these low-grade, simple attack methods, right? Like these low-grade weapon systems and approaches, because they're simple, but they're effective. They're very hard to combat, which is one of the reasons why I've, as you know, continually hammered on about the fact that contemporary or modern militaries in the West need to spend a lot more time engaged in not just counterinsurgency, but insurgency tactics and understanding how these wars are fought, because they're preparing for wars that they're not going to be fighting. Even if they do end up in a peer-to-peer conflict, it's not going to look the way that we seem to think. It's going to look a lot more like what we're starting to see here, which is a scary thought.
no, totally right. And, again, what's the next card Iran's going to play? I mean, the Houthis could launch attacks and close off the Red Sea again. Saudi oil's actually trying to get through the sorry, the Suez Canal right now. There you go. Oil prices
Hmm.
even more. And actually, the funny thing is that Iran's oil exports haven't really diminished much, and now it's an increased, price per barrel. They're actually making more money now than they were at the very beginning of the war.
Until those refineries are destroyed, which
Yeah,
is entirely possible. So there's another question there. This is what the Ukrainians have been targeting with inside Russia, is to try and diminish that capacity to profit off of it. So we'll
totally.
see
I
how
mean,
that
they
plays
just
out.
exactly they just took out 40% of Russia's oil export just the other day.
One more thought. It's kind of, again, coming back to that military revolution and this idea of the new war is the same as the old war. It makes me think of like, the turn of the last century and how we went from very low civilian casualties because, wars used to be fought in fields, right? To amongst the population. All of a sudden, we started to see wars where the civilian population or civilian casualties outnumbered the military casualties, and it starts to make me think about these sorts of things. And like, you're seeing a shift from attacking each other's military targets to wars of attrition, attacking infrastructure and abilities. It seems like more. I was mentioning amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. It seems like there's a lot more professionals out there that are starting to think about logistics. One of the things that's, striking to me about it is you're seeing a lot less direct engagement right now, well, in part because they don't know how to. As you see in Ukraine and Russia, they're kind of at a loss for how to confront one another,
Yeah. And we're finding
to close with and kill the enemy, right?
right, and we're finding that with the United States too, right? They have target acquisition, they can find some stuff, but they're going to run out of targets, and they're not collapsing the regime like they thought they were originally going to do.
Yeah, and then you're starting to look at. I think it's interesting to ponder that and the attacks being directed more towards civilian infrastructure and what the long-term consequences of that shift will be, especially when Western powers start to sort of recognize that, which I think you're starting to see with the US and Iran. Trump talking about attacking hydro dams and things like that.
Yeah, and we're starting to see that in the European side too. Soon they're going to be saying, "Hey, we might help out with you in Iran, but you have to pledge that you're going to continue your help with Ukraine."
Hmm.
I think on that note, thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure
Yep.
talking to you. I know we talk throughout the week and throughout the day, but it's nice that we're getting these quick podcasts out for everyone. And also, again, thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Till next time.
Till next time. Thank you for listening to the Defense Support Podcast. Podcast can be found on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Don't forget to follow the channel, leave us a comment. It helps with us being found by others. There is more content on the website, of course. Have a great day, and until next time.